tranquility and welcome. This is the continuation of what we did in class on Friday with our study of book one of My Antonia. So I got through the first two chapters. Always, it takes longer when we're studying a novel than I initially think. So because of our truncated schedule, shortened class periods, and all of these particulars, I think it's important that we start using these flip lessons as a way to kind of fill in these gaps and make sure that we can go forward a little bit more with our coverage so we can finish everything by the end of the term. So, nice Sunday afternoon. That winter weather advisory with all the snow, and it wasn't so bad. I went out this morning and played with my dog in the snow, and it's packing snow, so that's even more fun. But I thought I'd take this as an opportunity to talk about the characteristics of romanticism, especially with the glory of nature and how that has a significant role, especially as it is going to pertain to the development of the novels. So here are my notes. I made sure I went through and I took several chapters worth. So this should take us, I think, up through chapter 7. Yes, this is going to take us up through chapter 7. I probably will do an additional lecture to get us a little bit further into the material. So I think these are important characteristics for us to review. So here we go. So as we start diving into these chapters, and specifically the connections between the imagery of the land and the development of character, because it's not about plot, if you remember your characteristics, it's about the character development and why that is so significant. So I look immediately at what's going on in chapter 3, and we notice that we have these gigantic fields, this red grass, and this image of the red grass keeps showing up over and over again. For Jim, the grass and the fields are symbols of endless possibility. Absolutely, the potential that exists out there for Jim and his future and all of these possibilities. So, for me, I think it's important to track the symbolism of the fields, and specifically the number of times that Cather talks about the red grass, because I find that very, very specific. So, again, as I look at that, we know that these fields are the first references to the journey. It's also a reference to the Shmerdas, the first Bohemian family to move to this area. They are isolated and alone on the American frontier, because at this time this was absolutely the frontier. And so we have this family of immigrants filled with potential if they can just get over some of the initial barriers that they have. And it is through them that we see a lot of the larger themes in the novel. So I take a look, for example, at Peter Krajic and the role that he's going to play in really setting back the Shmerda family. He is dishonest. He is a cheat and a liar. We know that the land, the farm, and the house that he sold to the Shmerdas is not very good. He overcharges them, and he really creates a scenario where they're not going to be successful. I also find it incredibly important because Mr. Shmerda has absolutely zero skill at farming, so it is another barrier the Shmerdas are going to have to finding success in this new realist American environment. So I find that very, very significant. We know that Mr. Shmerda is a weaver and a fiddler. We know that he's dignified. We know that he's well dressed. He certainly is not a farmer, and so this is really imagery that tells me as a reader that this is not going to go well for Mr. Schmerda and for what he thinks is going to be the plan for the family. So this is why we see Jim's grandmother interfering. And interfering is not the right word. Intervening might be better in bringing food and bringing the resources over to help that family survive. So we're creating I want to say inexorable, but we're creating a definitive link between the two families. Jim Burton is going to be in this position of superiority because his family is helping out the immigrants. Now, this is a significant image because Jim develops this sense of, again, superiority, and that's going to be challenged as he interacts with Antony and other characters in the story. We look at the family. So we have Yulka, you have Merrick, who is mentally challenged. You have these other characters that are going to give Jim the opportunity to have siblings. Not exactly yet here in chapter 3, but it will certainly develop as an idea. So Jim is going to look back fondly as he grows up and as he has his own life experiences on these early moments. So the early moments are definitely going to have an impression on Jim as a character. So I think that's going to be something you really want to attend to as you read these particular chapters. Antonia, cute little girl. Jim, cute little boy. They run through the fields hand in hand. They're always together. We're having these great opportunities. It is a simple, platonic relationship. However, Jim, in his overly romanticized sensibilities, has the potential to put too much on this relationship and have it really linger in his mind as he grows older. I think that's an important idea. Jim is attaching more to this than perhaps Antonia is. As I look at my notes, one of the times that they go to the field is very windy, and Jim tells Antonia his name and the word for sky. They lie down next to each other in the middle of a field, and they stare up at the blue sky. This again, sense of endless possibility. But the irony here is that the possibilities are going to be much more significant for Jim because he is not an immigrant than it is for Antonia. A challenge that's going to develop throughout the course of the novel. So I wrote here, Jim attaches his impressions of Antonia, his early childhood friendship with Antonia, to romance. Those two ideas in his head forever fuse. And that's going to be a big burden for Jim to overcome as he sort of grows up and faces the realism of the world. So the romanticism and those characteristics are in Jim's head, and it colors his vision. I want you to track those ideas as you move forward. As you get closer to the end of the chapter, Mr. Schmerda calls them back after being in the fields, and he looks deeply at Jim. And this is one of those, I think, significant moments that we read into between the two men because there's something Mr. Schmerda is looking for, and Jim is going to be able to provide that, maybe. Jim's going to be able to potentially give Antonia access to a world that she wouldn't have while she was at home. And again, that's a hugely arguable point, and I think it's something worth looking into as you go further into the text. So, good afternoon again. For the sake of our process here, this is chapter 4 of My Antonia by Willa Cather. So, I'm going to start picking up speed here. I'm going to hit the major points to make sure that you have an anchor for where you go. So, if I cover chapters 4 and 5 here, I'm just going to give you the real, what I think are the important ideas that you want to be able to develop as you go. So, for example, I think chapter 4 is absolutely about the impressions of memory and how that memory influences and colors what we see around us. Now, this specifically relates to the idea of nostalgia that I mentioned in class, Nostalgia, this sense of nostalgia and the impact that that has on character. Now, chapter 3, I talked about cultural isolation at the end of my particular segment. Here, the power of memory has that potentially isolating impact as well. Characters become so driven by their memory and their sense of nostalgia that they're unable to move forward. So I think this to be an important idea. So we know that chapter 4, Jim is stuck in his head and he's reminiscing about the scenery. He's reminiscing about the countryside. He talks about riding his pony to the post office to give messages. He covers these. What I remember here is the horse's name is Dude, and that just always seems to stick in my head. Even as I was preparing my notes, I laughed a little bit to myself that his horse was named Dude. We know that there's no fences. We know that the landscape is wide open, huge fields of grass. There isn't a sense that civilization has crept in and taken away this romanticism of nature, which I think is a significant element here in chapter 4. So I think we also have a very significant image here in chapter 4, and it's the sunflowers planted by the Mormons as they left Utah. I think, again, that's significant because Jim's going to associate the roads. He's going to associate the sunflowers and the path in his memory. So he's going to hold on to that image for a very long time. He holds on to this image of the sunflowers as a path, a way forward, a guiding road, for lack of a better term, that's going to send him to where he needs to go. For him, it's a sense of freedom. For him, it's that sense of the open road. The all possibility is wide open in front of him. And I think, again, there's a lot of interesting parallels to the symbolism there. Flowers are a map, and this is what I wrote. Flowers are a map, a memory of a journey and a path forward for Jim. So in his mind, his interactions with Antonia and her family and several other things, life on the farm, is going to be this sort of directional path that he follows forward in his life. And I think, again, that is an important motif, M-O-T-I-F, to be able to track as we move forward. Certainly of value here as a larger concept. If I look at sort of what I think all this means in chapter 4, road imagery, very significant in this novel. Jim is going to be at a crossroads, if you will, several times when he has major decisions that he needs to make in his life. We know that historically, at this point in the United States, the frontier roads are extraordinarily winding. They follow the contours in the landscape. So it's more of a path through nature as opposed to imposing itself on nature. And I find that to be a significant image overall. Follows the natural contours, the ups and downs. It's much more of a metaphorical path than what we see happening later, where the roads are imposed upon the landscape, holding on very much to this natural idea. So again, I think that's sort of a significant little aside about nature and its potential. I wrote in my notes that these roads, this land, all of this red grass, which keeps showing up, this is a symbol or a reference to endless possibility in the novel. And again, with the absence of fences and with the absence of obstacles blocking the roads, I think again this becomes a significant image for Jim and this odyssey that he is on. And again, I used that image last week, or that term, that this is very much Jim's odyssey. I also used the term Bildungsroman as a concept here that I think is going to be incredibly important for Jim. So, roads represent the freedom, the vastness, and unlimited potential of the Western frontier. So, there's a lot going on in Jim's head about why I think these particular things matter as images in the book. Jim's the romantic. Antonia, because she's an immigrant and sort of denied full access, she's very much the realist in this analysis. Chapter 5, I think, also provides me some significant focus on how I might develop this. We know that these immigrants were initially greeted with a great deal of prejudice by those that were already there, and there were plenty of people willing to take advantage of them. And these immigrants were assumed to be inferior. Absolutely. There's a sense of inferiority, both morally and intellectually, than those that were already there. Use that idea to look at Jim Burton's vision, his interactions with Antonia and her family. I don't think he means to be condescending, but I think Cather is pointing out the fact that absolutely he's going to come from an attitude of superiority, especially initially in the novel. Then Jim is going to come at this from an attitude of superiority. And I think there's a lot going on here. I was going to include here a graphic about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, really for the perspective that socially, that third of 5 levels, our characters are limited in their exposure, and because their experiences are limited, they don't have the opportunity to fully grow as people. So I think that's important. And this is also why I posted that graphic to the right in the My Antonia category. So this novel really isn't about physical needs or safety needs. It's about really starting in that social development level. So pop over, look at that graphic, and be able to identify specifically the information there so that you know exactly what you need as a path forward. So again, these new immigrants were initially greeted with prejudice. There is a sense of moral and intellectual inferiority that somehow Jim is better. And I find that to be tremendously significant. I wrote down in my notes, where do we see such cultural separation between the immigrants and the native Nebraskans? Again, that's your specific social level. We get an anecdote in here about Pavel and Peter, the 2 Russians, and the challenges that they faced and are able to somewhat overcome. So in my notes, we have, in response to Pavel and Peter, contrast these 2 men and what they're able or willing to do against the character of Mrs. Shmerda. So contrast Pavel and Peter against the character of Mrs. Shmerda. I wrote in my notes that even though we're developing strong women, we're showing that immigrant men can be just as successful when they have to overcome tragedy. Immigrant men and women are capable, almost more than capable, in overcoming tragedy and being able to move forward. Compare this to Jim's struggles throughout the course of the novel. I wrote, challenge Jim's vision of identity in the novel. So what he learns about Pavel and Peter and Mrs. Schmerda and some of the others really is going to challenge his authority and challenge his, not challenging his authority, I misspoke, challenge his sense of identity as we move through the novel. Now, this whole lecture is going to be about 17 and 19 minutes, and I think there's a lot of information in here that's going to be valuable. So take some time, formulate your notes, and move through chapters 3, 4, and 5 with this content.